Good morning, and welcome to a new episode of Meatpacking Unpacked, Community Connected, brought to you by the Meatpacking District. My name is Jeffrey LeFrancois, and I'm the Executive Director of the Meatpacking Business Improvement District. Today, I'm joined by Danny Harris, the Executive Director of Transportation Alternatives, New York City's primary walking, biking, and public transit advocacy group. He's a leading voice in building cities for people, not just cars. Previously, he spent 4 years as a program director with the Knight Foundation in San Jose, California, where he supervised grant making related to placemaking, transportation, and affordable housing. Danny has taught at San Jose State University, was named a Vanguard Fellow by Next City, and received a citation from the American Institute of Architects. He's a graduate of Connecticut College and Princeton University, and he's a native New Yorker who currently resides in Manhattan with his family. Danny, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Pleasure. Good to see you.
You too. So we are doing some programming around Bike Month. It's May. And so tell us a little bit about Bike Month and how that ties to TA.
Well, I think quite simply, we would see that, every month is Bike Month, especially given the unprecedented bike boom that we're seeing in this city. It's been incredible, obviously, amid all the tragedy of COVID, to see how New Yorkers have been incredibly resilient in terms of looking at other opportunities to get around, especially if we look at essential workers and those who are still moving around the city and obviously leaning on bikes to do so. So this is just another celebration of that bike boom and the more than 1.6 million Yorkers who do ride a bike. So this is an opportunity really to celebrate cycling, to get people to come out and ride around. Since 2018, riders have logged more than 31,000 trips and almost 700,000 miles. And they've saved close to almost 1 million pounds of CO2 in the city by being on a car instead of a bicycle. So this is just an incredible opportunity to come together, whether as an individual or a company, and just to start to ride and see your city differently if you haven't already.
Exactly. And so transportation alternatives. What's alternative about transportation?
Well, I think we should start by saying, what's normal about what's happening on our streets. And so, so many of us obviously want the city to get back to a sense of normalcy. And it's important to remember just what normal looked like.
Sure.
Congestion, traffic, honking, air pollution. No matter where you live, your life has been impacted by, a city that's been built around cars for 100 years. So, trash on the sidewalk, rising traffic violence, increasing in speeding. So, true to our name, our goal is quite simply to give all New Yorkers safe, accessible, dignified, and sustainable transportation options. So if you live in a community where the only way you have to get around is a car, which AAA estimates is costing the average American about $10,000 a year, or a bus that may come infrequently and is stuck in traffic, then your city has failed you. If there's a bike network that doesn't fully connect to where you live, or may move you a little bit of the way but not the full way, then the city has failed you. So we quite simply want to work with partners like the Meatpacking Bid and others about giving all New Yorkers options to get around. We know that commute time is one of the single biggest indicators of moving people out of generational poverty, and there's really no path forward for New York that's built on streets for cars. Our future must be built on streets for people.
Sure. It's interesting when there's a debate about cyclists riding on the sidewalk, or all the cargo bikes that are populating the sidewalk in the corners of our streets now. Interesting alignment there when you remind people that it's actually a policy failure, that there isn't appropriate space, so that cyclists don't have a space that's not the sidewalk that they feel safe on, or there isn't space for cargo bikes to be doing the good work that they're doing now, as more goods are ordered online and just more stuff moves that way in the city. So in terms of policy, it was super easy over the past 100 years to just give the roads to cars, right? And the pandemic really shed a whole lot of light on thinking of the roadway as not just a road, but as public space. And so what policies have you seen really take hold in the past year? And then where do you see us really being able to grow going forward?
Yeah. So thanks, Jeffrey. I think fundamentally we view asphalt as an asset, and New York City has no shortage of it. There are more than 19,000 lane miles and 3 million parking spaces across the city that are devoted to the movement and storage of vehicles. and a minority of New York City households own a car. While, for those of you who have a car or have driven, struggle with parking, it's important to mention that for every one car registered in New York City, there's 1.5 parking spaces available to that car. Whereas for every 116 bicycles in New York, there's only one place to put it. So this is, an inequitable distribution of our public space. And secondly, to our people, space is the greatest asset that the city have, and we squander 75% of it on the movement and storage of vehicles. So again, whatever your issue is, if you're worried about, how people are going to get to your store or your building, how office workers will come back, how those who, how essential workers get around, healthcare workers have the longest commute time in New York. I mean, there's no issue in this city that does not run through transportation. And so as we think about the future, we must give this space back to people. It's important to stress that giving space back to people doesn't mean that those who need to drive can't do so. You can still own a car in a future that's built for people, but 40% of all car trips in New York City are under 2 miles. Those are trips that many people could opt into taking the bus, walking, taking a bicycle, and that requires fundamentally reimagining streets. So our plan for the future is what we call 25 by 25. We're calling on mayoral candidates to commit to repurpose 25% of our street space by 2025. This would fundamentally reimagine what New York is, what opportunity looks like for all New Yorkers, help address the situation for those who've been most impacted, especially for low income and communities of color, and that there will be no issue that will not be touched and will not be improved when we give streets back to people and when we give the space back to opportunity in this city.
So let's talk business for a minute. Oftentimes when we talk about when the city puts forth a policy that changes the use of the road, there's a claim that it will eliminate business. Last year in September in the Meatpacking District, we did a Future Streets installation where we did an install that really transformed and showed what a street could look like when not prioritized for cars. And across the board, greater foot traffic and sales in businesses. And the one place that couldn't benefit, and I think this is pretty interesting, is because of the capacities at restaurants last summer and fall, you didn't have that shoulder to shoulder at the bar while waiting to get your table for brunch or dinner. So while we couldn't correlate it to restaurants, I'm very confident that it actually would correlate to that as well. What numbers have you seen in terms of the places where we have made changes, be they pedestrianization of Times Square, busways on 14th, 34th. Now, of course, we've got 181st Street as well. What have you seen in terms of positive business outcomes?
Well, let me start, Jeffrey, with some polling. So we know that this is not just good policy, it's good politics. We commissioned some polling with Siena College and found overwhelming support across the boroughs, across demographics, across age groups, even across whether people owned a car or not. Overwhelming support for people who want more amenities in their neighborhood, even at the expense of fewer traffic lanes or parking spaces. Those last two pieces are critical. We're not just asking New York voters, do you like bus lanes or open restaurants or open streets? We're asking them if they want them where they live, even knowing that there is a cost in terms of the current footprint. Overwhelming support across the boroughs. So, we know that public opinion is screaming for more of this. We also know, as you mentioned, that there's no shortage of data. You can look at, it's not just looking at the receipt data at a place like the transformation of Times Square. It also, it helped traffic. It helped the movement of vehicles that were going through there, whether it was a private vehicle or it was a bus. We know that 14th Street transformed one of the slowest buses in the slowest city in America into one of the fastest. And if you look quite simply at open restaurants, I mean, it's important to mention that, a year and a half ago, when we would go in this trench warfare approach of neighborhood to neighborhood to pitch improvements, whether it was about safety improvements or protected bike or bus lanes, in many cases, it was the restaurants that might step up and say, well, if I don't have those 2 parking spots in front of my restaurant, I'm going to lose all my business from the clients who are, driving in from Long Island, Westchester, Uptown, Brooklyn. Now they're saying, if you put cars back into those spaces, we can't survive. I mean, look at what the city was able to do overnight. They, 15,000 parking spots were immediately reimagined into spaces for commerce, into spaces for community. to keep some of our fundamental businesses alive. The same can happen with schools, with retail. The whole point is that, again, asphalt is an asset. And during the challenges of COVID, especially as we talked about social distancing, the need that people need more space, many of us looked around and for the first time we could see how much of our space we squander on the movement and storage of vehicles. So it's helping receipts, it's helping people move faster, it's better for our air quality. And the reality is that this is the new normal in New York. There cannot be a New York City where open streets and open restaurants are taken away. This is the new normal. We need to protect them. We need to expand them. We need to ensure that they get to more neighborhoods. And fundamentally, we need to think about how we can connect them, especially with the protected bike and bus network.
So we've watched in the past year, those that have been watching, Paris transform, London transform. China's done it long before that, quite frankly. What makes it most difficult to do in New York? Like, what is the biggest obstacle in New York to a well-connected protected bike network, to a network of busways, not just one in Flushing and one in Lower Manhattan? These should be connected. What are the obstacles there?
Leadership and vision. Leadership and vision. Look, I mean, our approach right now towards these pieces of infrastructure, the city decided to build a bridge from the Meatpacking District over to New Jersey, but they only decided to build a quarter of the bridge, but they still let people use it. And they said, well, go swim the rest of the way. You may get, hit by a ferry or eaten by a shark, but, we'll call it an accident and that's all the price of business, right? Yep. So, the reality is that, our city takes things like streets seriously. In many cases, they take sidewalks when they're not covered in trash seriously. These are built to be protected networks that serve all New Yorkers. Open streets, protected bike and bus lanes are still sort of dropped here and there, and they're not connected. So, we need to get to a place, especially with this bike boom. Just look at city bike ridership. It had some of its most ridden days, in the last year. I think September, maybe the 12th, was the highest traffic day. And it's important to remind everybody that we weren't getting a lot of tourists back then. So these are critical pieces of transportation infrastructure that our mayor, our next mayor need to take seriously and build out a vision. When you look at the cities that you're talking about, New York City is an amazing example of a city that not only can't learn from any other city, but refuses to learn from itself. Is what we ultimately need is an organizing principle around this. If you look in London and Paris, it's about air quality and sustainability. In Copenhagen, it was about prioritizing people over cars. In Bogota, it was about addressing inequality. In New York City, we have no shortage of challenges, and there's no way to answer any of them without centering transportation. So our next leader needs to put our streets as a pathway to recovery, to think about asphalt as an asset, and to fundamentally give this space back to New Yorkers. Everybody will benefit starting immediately, including drivers.
And yeah, I mean, I guess it's leadership and vision at the end of the day, and the ability to implement and execute. You mentioned 25 by 25. I think a lot of New Yorkers, I think a lot of Americans, quite frankly, don't know what a street could look like, but a curb lane filled right. with parked cars and a direction or two, one or the other. What are some of the ideas that TA is putting out there? Because not every street necessarily needs the same thing another one does, right? So are there some specific things you're trying to advocate for in this? Or is it really about just a total re-envisioning and an unknown to a certain extent?
Yeah, well, I think as a starting point, Jeffrey, it's important to go back, throughout COVID, one of the things that I heard regularly across the city was, people who may not be familiar with urban planning or transportation policy or even ride a bike, you started to hear people describe quality of life improvements. I can hear the birds outside of my window. I can breathe the air. I live in Queens and I can see Midtown for the first time. I'm an older adult or somebody with limited abilities, and now there's an open street or a place that I can walk without fear of getting run over. There was a fundamental change in people's perception of what a city can provide, and also recognizing that, again, normal is not cars racing and honking and drag racing, as I hear living near the FDR. That is not normal. That is broken, it is inequitable, and it has been that way for over 100 years. So as we think about what can come next and we give streets back to people, what this can mean is a yes and. What the city has given us is a no but, or yes but, or you all have to fight and work this out. And just look at the challenge that's happening now between, for example, open restaurants and protected bike lanes. We should have all of those and more. We shouldn't be competing against each other for table scraps. If we can get to 25 by 25, even start to advance in that direction, what it means is that we can provide over 1,000 miles of open streets. We can build a protected bike and bus network. We can provide safe space in front of every public school in New York that's car free. It means that we can take trash off of our sidewalks. It means that we could have dedicated loading zones on every block, getting rid of double and triple parking. I mean, there's no issue that doesn't touch the streets. We can create daylighting at every intersection to make them safer. We can give green space, especially in the communities that don't need it. We can address heat deserts. There's no problem, again, that does not run through space and reimagining what it could provide. So all of this is a yes and. All of it is a yes and. We can have and more. And I would just close with, Jeffrey, that 25% by 2025 still means that the majority of street space would be devoted to cars. Right now it's 75%. If we get to 25%, it still means that 57% of our right-of-way is devoted to the movement and storage of vehicles. We're not asking for all of it. We're asking for a significant portion, and we know that we need to create more dynamism on our streets. So again, it's not just SUVs that are racing around killing our children.
Yep. I like the yes and factor a whole lot. I also have always said that people don't realize that Department of Transportation is the one agency that affects New Yorkers more than any other agency. And it's tangible and it can be transformative for the better. So also, I'm so intrigued by this asphalt as an asset, because I often get angry when I see so much asphalt, right? The fight going on 3rd Avenue right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're lucky in Meatpacking because we have a lot of cobblestones, so that it's not as visually jarring.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the positive flip on that. That's really helpful.
Yeah. And I think, Jeffrey, too, that if you look at, especially if you look at the meatpacking, both recognizing, the user behavior before COVID, what's happening now is, with that incredible space that you have access to, that can be a pedestrian thoroughfare. I mean, there's no reason that you can't have, a super block. If you look at, what's happening in places like Barcelona, and really sort of connecting the businesses, those who, live and want to pass through the area, and giving them that vital space to have it, transform and support all assets that being there. Again, there are ways that you can still have deliveries that take place. You can still have people get dropped off and people and things getting dropped off and delivered. Those things don't change. Utilities still have to get, or still need to be accessible. Fire trucks, police cars, all those things need to get through, and they can happen. You can still prioritize people, and we're just so heartened to see the work you're doing and excited to see more of it.
Thank you. We're super excited by it too. This year presents a whole new package of opportunities and challenges, but all like challenges in a good way, because usually they force you to do better things.
Right.
So I want to ask, we've heard a little bit about TA, we've heard a little about 25 by 25, the importance of bikes. What is one thing you're most excited about in terms of, it's a political year, in terms of the election that's ahead? No matter right, we're not talking candidates, we're just talking, there's opportunity with change. Right. And what do you see as our best opportunity moment right now?
Well, I think it's important to go back 7 years ago, sort of a student of history as well. You had a candidate, maybe more than one, who were talking about, ripping up the effing bike lanes. I mean, that's really where the conversation was. It was, this was sort of anathema to the way that we operate in New York, and, our life is built around cars, and that's what the future is. Look where we are 7 years later. Almost every single candidate has either endorsed or embraced 25 by 25. They have a bold transportation policy. They're showing up at forums, not just about transportation, but around biking. They're talking about streets as an asset. They're thinking intersectionally about how, all of these issues are connected, especially with climate change. And look at how it also ladders up at Washington with Build Back Better. It's not a coincidence that Secretary Mayor Pete, who's leading the charge of transportation, is also talking about the intersection with racial justice, about sustainability, about reimagining even what highways are. We're also hearing that from Senator Schumer. I mean, it is a fundamental shift in conversation about what our issues are. These are not a bunch of transit nerds that are trying to get you to ride a bike. This is looking fundamentally at cities, at systems, at how they've been broken, and how, newsflash, owning a car is not freedom. It's just good marketing. Freedom is actually having the possibility of choosing how you want to get around and not being burdened by debt and having to spend most of your time looking around for parking. Freedom is having options, not being bound to only one. So it is a new day in the city and in this country. And as we think about how to make decisions, it's important to remember, whether we're talking about the future of the BQE or the FDR, or pick your favorite infrastructure, that these things don't just last years or decades. We are still struggling with 100 years of decision making that chose to prioritize the car and all that was around it. Imagine if the next 100 years are built around people, because there's no other imagination possible that's built around electric or autonomous or flying vehicles or whatever else Elon Musk is trying to sell to our cities. We need to just build around people, and then everything else will follow.
So thank you for that inspiration. It's heartening to hear, because you're right, it's not just transit geeks talking about these things, and that's kind of awesome. I want to unpack a little bit about Danny Harris. So just a couple of fire round questions,
Sure.
if we may. So it's really exciting as the city reopens, and I'm excited for certain things, but for you, is it a night at the theater or a visit to the museum?
Visit to the museum.
And are you doing brunch or dinner out if you're doing a meal out?
Brunch. We have little kids, so.
Got it. Makes it easier. And at that museum visit, is there a preference for paintings or photography?
Ooh, photography. I worked as a
Okay.
photographer for a long time.
Beach vacation getaway or a city far on the other side of the globe?
Beach.
There you have it. Those weren't too scary, I hope.
Right.
Anything else to add today, Danny?
No, I'm just so grateful, Jeffrey, for your partnership and for the work that the Meatpacking Bit is doing. I think that you have such an incredible footprint, that you have worked so hard to make not just a hub for people to come in and celebrate what's possible, but also to really push the city forward on what could be. So, again, I'm so grateful for your leadership. We look to you in so many ways for inspiration, and just really eager for you to do and build the incredible potential in that district with so many of your partners, and we stand to support you. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being with us today on this episode of Meatpacking Unpacked. To our viewers, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned to hear from us again from the city's cast of characters across the cultural, political, and business spectrums. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. You got me all, I was like blushing. I was all excited. I mean, you were a transit geek, so it's exciting.
Yeah.
But like, people are talking about tearing down highways who didn't even think that was a thing 10 years ago.
Didn't think it was possible, or didn't think that it was needed, or
Yeah.
yeah.
Just real quick, do you think that the FDR or the West Side Highway would be considered? There's a big pot of money for highways that segregated communities, right, from when they were built, that they're trying to dedicate that today.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Manhattan has a shot at any of that? Or no, it's really going to be the Bronx that gets the bulk of that if we win any of it?
I would say that those are probably not the candidates for that category.
Yeah.
And I do see that there are other opportunities that relate to, reducing the burden. So just sort of this is just sort of us chatting, or is this?
Yeah.
So I was talking to, I've had the same conversation now with the Central Park Conservancy and along the Greenway, is that these are less being used for transportation, and they're now basically bike superhighways. So people who need to move around, especially delivery cyclists, are kind of using them as safe ways to get up and down. So the opportunity there is, how do you start to get those organizations fighting for more, uptown, downtown, crosstown protected bike paths, and also recognizing that the Greenway needs to expand. So you got to start taking more lanes there.
Yep.
I don't know if those will ever get fully torn down and turned into pedestrian space, or maybe they're dug down, because just the impact of people moving north south and what that's going to mean on other residential streets. that may be a bit harder to sell. I think from our perspective, like we're always going to be pushing to rip up highways and look for other options, especially looking at, the waterways and bringing more accessibility to them, and not just with ferries, but, moving freight onto ferries.
Yeah.
So I think that there are real solutions that can be provided. I think it's our job to push the envelope of what's possible, and also to start to look at the pain points in these areas and help to direct them into positive options, instead of saying like we need to just enforce our way out of this or stop having cyclists using the greenways, but to say, okay, well, we just need to recognize that demand is up significantly, so we need to find other outlets for people to start moving. And guess what, you know we can take lanes on the West Side Highway.
Okay, so I am a good friend of mine, Celine Armstrong. She was the head project director and engineer behind the Little Island project.
Uh-huh.
He's also very involved with AIA and APLA and all that stuff. And we're talking about putting together a steering committee of some sort to do a West Side Highway re-envisioning.
They're doing one now on the FDR with, I was just on an interview with it. ULI is doing it with, I think, NYU and Sam Schwartz.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, maybe you should just get them to keep going.
Finish the loop. But
Yeah.
basically want to figure out what the scope of a study should look like, and then get, our assembly members along the West Side, our state senators, to throw some money in. Let's pay for some studies, some feasibility studies. And then do we throw it out for competition, and sort of just think about how we can begin plugging the changes into more, instead of just conversations of you and me and for your groups leading these things, how can we really get people on board to make it happen?
But can you actually have a removal of the FDR without, do they have to be connected, right? Like
I think so. Like, I don't think we get rid of them. I think they remain roadways of a sort, but to me, they should be boulevards, not highways, right? In a way.
Right.
Yeah, it's not, I don't think we ever get rid of them. I guess I just, if you live on the FDR, I'm looking out at the West Side Highway right now. And I remember days back last year when I could walk across it when there were no cars on it because of pandemic stuff. So,
yeah.
Well, really appreciate this. I may be reaching out to pick your brain a little bit on the steering committee stuff, because we want to put a real group together that can come up with something for how we might attack a re-envisioning of it.
Yeah. So, and do you want me to connect you with the ULI?
Yeah, because I haven't heard about that one yet.
Yeah, I'll I think this guy's named Charles, but I'll connect you with him.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great to see you, Jeffrey.
You too, Danny. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks
Take
for that.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.